This useless girl can't even serve wine properly. Where did you find her? The streets. Marcus Wellington's voice boomed across the elegant dining room, his manicured finger pointing dismissively at the young black woman in the crisp navy uniform who had just finished pouring wine for the distinguished guests. The crystal chandeliers overhead cast dancing shadows across his smug face as uncomfortable laughter rippled through the crowd of wealthy executives and their wives. Zara Blackwell kept her eyes downcast, her grip tightening almost imperceptibly on the silver serving tray. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but years of preparation had taught her to control every muscle, every breath, every flicker of emotion that might betray her true identity. She was not just any maid. She was the sole heir to a business empire worth over $500 million, and this man had just made the biggest mistake of his professional life. Perhaps you should ask the owner of this house, Zara replied quietly, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest like a storm. Marcus sneered, swirling his wine with theatrical arrogance. The owner? You mean my future business partner? I highly doubt Robert Blackwell would waste his valuable time discussing the incompetence of the help. He turned to the other guests with a conspiratorial grin. Though I suppose we should be grateful. After all, someone has to clean up after real people do real work. The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, crystal glasses catching the light as nervous hands reached for safe distractions. Mrs. Victoria Ashworth, wife of the banking magnate, cleared her throat delicately. Marcus, perhaps we should focus on the excellent meal. Nonsense. Marcus interrupted, his voice growing louder with each sip of the $30,000 bottle of wine he was so carelessly consuming. I believe in calling things as I see them. Excellence should be rewarded, and mediocrity should be called out. Isn't that right, girl? He turned back to Zara, his pale blue eyes glinting with malicious satisfaction. Zara's fingers found the small silver locket beneath her uniform, a gift from her father that contained his final letter to her. The metal was warm against her skin, a reminder of why she was enduring this humiliation. I believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, sir, she said carefully. Dignity? Marcus laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the room like breaking glass. Dignity is earned through accomplishment, through contributing something valuable to society. Not through carrying trays and making beds. What Marcus Wellington didn't know, as he stood there in his $15,000 Italian suit, ridiculing the woman who held his professional future in her hands, was that every word was being carefully catalogued, every cruel laugh recorded in Zara's memory for the reckoning that was to come. He had no idea that he was standing in the dining room of the Blackwell estate, that the portraits on the walls were of Zara's ancestors, that the very wine he was drinking had been selected from her father's private collection. The irony was exquisite and devastating. Marcus had spent the last 6 months courting what he believed to be a partnership with Blackwell Industries, one of the most successful conglomerates in the country. He had submitted proposals, attended meetings, schmoozed with intermediaries, all while believing that he was the obvious choice for the collaboration that would catapult his own company into the highest echelons of corporate success. If you're already invested in seeing this arrogant man get exactly what he deserves, smash that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. You might be surprised to find someone nearby who's rooting for justice just like you are. As the evening wore on, Marcus's behavior only grew worse. He snapped his fingers at Zara when he wanted his glass refilled, made loud comments about the declining standards of domestic help, and at one point, deliberately knocked over his water glass just to watch her clean it up. Oops, he said with mock concern as water spread across the antique mahogany table. I suppose that's what happens when you hire people who don't know their place. Better clean that up quickly before it ruins the finish. Though I suppose this table has seen better days anyway. Zara knelt gracefully to retrieve the fallen napkins, her movements controlled and dignified despite the humiliation. As she worked, she caught the eye of James Morrison, the distinguished older man sitting at the far end of the table. Morrison was her father's longtime lawyer and one of the few people at the dinner who knew her true identity. His eyes conveyed both sympathy and barely contained rage at what he was witnessing. Morrison had initially opposed Zara's plan when she presented it to him 6 months after her father's funeral. Miss Blackwell, he had said in his measured baritone, "Your father built this empire with dignity and respect. Surely there are other ways to evaluate potential partners." But Zara had been resolute. "My father also told me that a person's true character is revealed not by how they treat their equals, but by how they treat those they perceive as beneath them. If I'm going to trust someone with his legacy, I need to know who they really are when they think no one important is watching." Now, watching Marcus humiliate his daughter with such casual cruelty, Morrison understood why she had insisted on this test. The man's true nature was being revealed in all its ugly glory. The other dinner guests were a carefully selected mix of Marcus's potential competitors and neutral observers. There was David Chen, CEO of Pacific Imports, a soft-spoken man in his 50s who had built his company from nothing and never forgot his humble beginnings. When Zara refilled his wine glass, he looked up with a warm smile and said, "Thank you very much. I hope you're being treated well here." There was Sarah Mitchell, the brilliant biotechnology entrepreneur who had revolutionized medical research while maintaining her commitment to ethical business practices. She had watched Marcus's behavior with growing disgust, and when Zara passed near her chair, she whispered, "I'm sorry you're having to deal with this." And there was Robert Kim, the innovative technology executive whose company had transformed digital communications while maintaining a reputation for treating employees like family. He had been silent for most of the dinner, but his dark eyes tracked every one of Marcus's cruel comments with the precision of a man accustomed to evaluating character. These were Marcus's competition, though he was too arrogant to recognize the threat they posed. In his mind, the partnership was already his. After all, his company, Wellington Enterprises, had posted impressive profits for 3 consecutive years. He had connections throughout the industry, a Harvard MBA, and the kind of old money confidence that had always opened doors for him. What he lacked, and what he had never learned to value, was the basic human decency that Zara's father had considered the cornerstone of any successful business relationship. Robert Blackwell had built his empire on the principle that a company was only as strong as its character, and that true leadership meant lifting others up, not stepping on them. As the main course was served, an exquisite preparation of herb-crusted lamb with roasted vegetables, Marcus continued his performance of superiority. He criticized the temperature of the meat, complained about the placement of the silverware, and made increasingly personal attacks on Zara's competence. "I have to wonder," he said, cutting into his lamb with aggressive precision, "whether this is the best your household can do. In my experience, when you hire people based on charity rather than merit, this is the result you get." Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper who had served the Blackwell family for over 20 years, appeared in the doorway at that moment. She was a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that had seen enough of life to recognize both kindness and cruelty at first glance. She had watched Zara grow up, had held her when she cried after her mother's death, had celebrated her graduation from Stanford Business School, and had been present at the reading of Robert Blackwell's will. Mrs. Chen knew exactly who Marcus Wellington was, and what he represented. She had seen men like him before, men who believed that wealth and privilege gave them the right to diminish others, men who confused cruelty with strength and believed that their success excused their failures of character. "Is everything satisfactory with dinner, sir?" Mrs. Chen asked Marcus, her voice professionally neutral despite the fire in her eyes. Marcus barely glanced at her. "The food is adequate, though I have to say, your staff could use some serious training in proper service. This one," he gestured dismissively at Zara, "has been nothing but a disappointment all evening." Mrs. Chen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I see. And what specifically has disappointed you? Where do I begin?" Marcus laughed, encouraged by what he perceived as an audience for his complaints. "Slow service, poor attention to detail, general incompetence. Honestly, I don't know how you people expect to maintain standards when you hire based on, well, let's just say when you lower your standards." The racial undertone in his words hung in the air like poison. Several guests stopped eating, their discomfort now impossible to hide. David Chen set down his fork entirely, his face darkening with anger. Sarah Mitchell's knuckles were white as she gripped her wine glass. But Mrs. Chen simply nodded. "I understand your concerns, sir. I'll be sure to pass along your feedback to the appropriate parties. See that you do, Marcus said, completely missing the dangerous calm in her voice. Though frankly, I'm not sure training can fix fundamental problems of character and capability. What Marcus didn't realize was that Mrs. Chen had just given him enough rope to hang himself with. Every word was being mentally recorded, every insult catalogued for the reckoning that was coming. Mrs. Chen had helped raise Zara, had taught her strength and dignity in the face of adversity, and she knew that the young woman serving his wine with such grace was showing more class in her silence than he had displayed in his entire performance. As the evening progressed toward dessert, Marcus seemed to gain energy from his cruelty. Perhaps it was the wine, perhaps it was the audience, or perhaps it was simply his true nature finally being given free rein, but his attacks on Zara became more personal and more vicious. You know, he said, leaning back in his chair with the satisfied air of a man who believed himself the center of attention, this really brings up larger questions about hiring practices in today's economy. When you prioritize diversity over competence, this is what you get. Robert Kim finally spoke up, his voice cutting through Marcus's monologue like a blade. And what exactly do you think competence looks like, Mr. Wellington? Marcus beamed, pleased to have someone engage with his theories. Competence is results, Mr. Kim. It's education, background, proven track record. It's hiring the best person for the job, not the person who checks the right boxes for social justice warriors. I see, Kim said quietly. And you determine someone's competence by observing them serve wine? Among other things, Marcus replied, completely oblivious to the trap being set. There are standards of service, attention to detail, professional bearing. These things matter in any industry. Interesting perspective, Kim murmured, taking a sip of his wine. I've always found that true competence is revealed over time, through sustained excellence and integrity. But perhaps our definitions differ. Marcus waved dismissively. Integrity is a luxury you can afford when you're dealing with equals. When you're managing workers, what matters is efficiency and knowing their place. The room fell silent except for the soft clink of crystal and silverware. Even Marcus seemed to realize he had crossed a line, but his arrogance wouldn't allow him to back down. Instead, he doubled down. Look, I'm not trying to be cruel, he said, though his words suggested otherwise. I'm being practical. This girl, he pointed again at Zara, who was standing near the sideboard with perfect posture and controlled breathing, is clearly not suited for this work. She lacks the skills, the bearing, and frankly, the background necessary for a position in a household of this caliber. Zara felt her father's locket grow warm against her skin, and she heard his voice in her memory, remember, my dear, that true strength isn't in striking back immediately, but in choosing the right moment to reveal the truth. That moment was coming, but not yet. Not until she had extracted every ounce of Marcus's true character for the record. James Morrison cleared his throat gently. Mr. Wellington, I'm curious about your philosophy regarding leadership and employee relations. How do you handle personnel matters in your own company? Marcus straightened, pleased to discuss what he considered his area of expertise. Leadership is about maintaining clear hierarchies and expectations. I believe in firm management and clear consequences for underperformance. You can't run a successful business by coddling people who don't meet standards. And how do you define those standards? Morrison pressed, his legal mind working to build a case that would soon be presented in a very different courtroom than Marcus expected. Results, efficiency, and understanding of proper workplace behavior, Marcus replied confidently. For instance, if one of my employees performed as poorly as this maid tonight, there would be immediate consequences. You can't maintain excellence by accepting mediocrity. Sarah Mitchell finally spoke, her voice sharp with controlled anger. And what exactly has this young woman done that you consider poor performance? Marcus looked at her as if the answer were obvious. Slow service, poor attention to detail, general incompetence. Plus, there's the matter of attitude, a certain resistance to feedback that suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of her role. Resistance to feedback? Mitchell repeated. She hasn't said more than 10 words all evening. Exactly, Marcus said, missing her point entirely. proper service staff should be invisible, efficient, and grateful for the opportunity to serve their betters. This one has been present, if you know what I mean. The racist and classist implications of his words settled over the room like a toxic cloud. David Chin pushed his plate away, his appetite completely gone. I'm not sure I do know what you mean, Mr. Wellington. Could you be more specific? Marcus looked around the table, suddenly sensing that his audience was not as receptive as he had believed. But his arrogance had carried him too far to retreat now. All I'm saying is that there are natural hierarchies in society, and successful organizations respect those hierarchies. When you try to force people into roles they're not suited for, everyone suffers. Natural hierarchies, Morrison repeated, his voice deadly quiet. Based on what criteria? Background, education, breeding, Marcus said, the wine having stripped away any pretense of political correctness. Look, I'm not trying to be controversial here, I'm just stating facts. Some people are born to lead, others to follow. Some to think, others to serve. It's not cruel, it's just reality. Zara's hands trembled slightly as she set down a fresh bottle of wine on the sideboard. 26 years of life, a Stanford MBA, fluency in 4 languages, a brilliant business mind that had already identified 3 new markets for expansion. None of it mattered to this man because he had decided her worth based on the color of her skin and the uniform she wore. But she also felt a grim satisfaction building in her chest. Marcus was giving her exactly what she needed, a complete and undeniable record of his character. When the revelation came, there would be no room for excuses, no possibility of claiming his words had been taken out of context. He was revealing himself with the thoroughness of a man who believed himself among friends. Mrs. Chen reappeared to oversee the dessert service, and Marcus immediately seized the opportunity to continue his performance. Ah, good. Perhaps you can explain to your staff the importance of attention to detail. The wine service tonight has been particularly disappointing. I'll be sure to address any shortcomings, Mrs. Chen replied with the same dangerous calm she had displayed earlier. Is there anything specific you'd like me to communicate? Marcus gestured broadly at Zara. Basic competence would be a start. I don't know where you found this one, but she's clearly not ready for a position in a home of this caliber. Perhaps she'd be better suited to less demanding work. Less demanding work, Mrs. Chen repeated. Such as? I don't know, cleaning offices after hours, working in a factory, something more appropriate to her background and capabilities. The silence that followed was profound and dangerous. Even Marcus seemed to sense that something had shifted in the room, though he was too obtuse to understand what. The other guests were now staring at him with unconcealed disgust, and even he couldn't miss the hostility radiating from every corner of the room. Is there something wrong? He asked, his voice taking on a slightly defensive tone. Morrison smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Not at all, Mr. Wellington. You're being very illuminating about your management philosophy and personal values. Please, continue. But Marcus had finally realized that his audience was not appreciating his commentary. He attempted to backtrack, though his fundamental arrogance made it impossible for him to offer a genuine apology. Look, I hope I haven't given the wrong impression. I'm not unsympathetic to the challenges facing certain communities. I simply believe in maintaining standards. Certain communities, David Chin repeated flatly. Well, yes. I mean, we all know that different groups face different challenges in the workplace. I'm just saying that we can't lower our expectations to accommodate those challenges. Excellence is excellence, regardless of background. He was digging himself deeper with every word, and Zara found herself almost admiring the thoroughness of his self-destruction. It was like watching a masterclass in how privilege and prejudice could blind someone to their own cruelty. The dessert course passed in relative silence, with Marcus finally seeming to realize that his commentary was not being well received. But the damage was done. Every person at that table had heard him reveal his true nature, had witnessed the casual cruelty with which he treated someone he perceived as powerless. As the evening wound down and guests began to make their excuses to leave, Marcus attempted to salvage his position through small talk and forced charm. But the spell was broken. David Chen left with barely a handshake, Sarah Mitchell offered only the coldest of professional courtesies, and Robert Kim departed with a look that promised that this evening would not be forgotten. Only Morrison remained as the last of the dishes were cleared away, and Marcus finally allowed himself to relax, believing that he had weathered the storm of his own making. "Well," he said, loosening his tie, "I hope my honesty about your staff situation didn't cause offense. Sometimes these things need to be said, you know?" Morrison regarded him with the cold attention of a prosecutor examining evidence. "Oh, I don't think anyone was offended, Mr. Wellington. Enlightened, perhaps. Informed. But not offended." Marcus missed the implications entirely. "Good, good. I believe in straight talk, especially among business partners. Speaking of which, when might I expect to hear about the partnership decision? I assume tonight's dinner was a final evaluation of sorts." "You could say that," Morrison replied. "Though perhaps not in the way you imagine." As Marcus gathered his coat and prepared to leave, he caught sight of Zara cleaning wine glasses near the kitchen entrance. One final insult seemed to occur to him, a parting shot that would demonstrate his continued dominance over someone he saw as beneath his notice. "You know," he called out to her, loud enough for Morrison to hear, "you might want to consider a different line of work. Some people just aren't cut out for service positions. It requires a certain humility and attention to detail that not everyone possesses." Zara looked up, meeting his eyes directly for the first time that evening. In her gaze, he should have seen the intelligence of a Stanford-educated business executive, the strength of a woman who had built coalitions and negotiated deals worth millions of dollars, the quiet power of someone who held his professional future in her hands. Instead, he saw only what his prejudice allowed him to see, a black woman in a maid's uniform who had failed to show him the deference he believed he deserved. "I'll certainly take your advice under consideration, sir," Zara replied, her voice carrying undertones that would have warned a more perceptive man that dangerous currents ran beneath her calm surface. But Marcus Wellington was not a perceptive man. He was a man blinded by privilege and prejudice, a man who had just spent an entire evening revealing the ugliness of his character to the very person whose approval he sought. As his car pulled away from the Blackwell estate, Marcus felt satisfied with his performance. He had demonstrated his leadership capabilities, his high standards, and his ability to speak truth regardless of political correctness. In his mind, he had shown exactly why he was the right choice for partnership with Blackwell Industries. What he had actually shown was why he would never be trusted with Robert Blackwell's legacy, why he was precisely the kind of man that Zara's father had spent his life fighting against, and why the revelation that awaited him would be both perfectly just and utterly devastating. Inside the mansion, Zara finally allowed herself to remove the mask of servility she had worn all evening. Her hands shook slightly as she untied her apron, the adrenaline of controlled rage finally finding release. Mrs. Chen appeared beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did well tonight, child," the older woman said softly. "Your father would be proud of your strength." "It was harder than I expected," Zara admitted, her voice finally showing the strain of the evening. "The things he said revealed exactly who he is," Morrison interjected, approaching them with a folder thick with documents. "Which is precisely what we needed. Tomorrow's meeting will be very different from what Mr. Wellington expects." Zara nodded, thinking of the business presentation scheduled for the next morning, when Marcus would arrive expecting to finalize his partnership deal, only to discover that he had spent the evening humiliating the very person whose approval he needed. The justice would be poetic, complete, and devastating. But first, she needed to prepare for what would undoubtedly be the most satisfying business meeting of her career. As she climbed the stairs to her father's study, where his portrait watched over the empire he had built through decency and determination, Zara felt the weight of his legacy settling on her shoulders. Tomorrow, she would prove that his principles lived on, that character still mattered in business, and that actions, especially cruel ones, always had consequences. Marcus Wellington was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life, that the person you dismiss as powerless might be the one who holds all the power, and that treating others with dignity isn't just good manners, it's good business. The morning sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Blackwell Industries conference room as Marcus Wellington adjusted his platinum cufflinks and smoothed his silk tie. He had arrived 30 minutes early for what he believed would be the formalization of his partnership with one of the most powerful business empires in the country. His leather briefcase contained contracts already pre-signed on his end, projections showing the massive profits their collaboration would generate, and a bottle of champagne he planned to open in celebration. Marcus felt invincible. Despite the slightly chilly reception from some guests at dinner the previous evening, he was confident that his business acumen and industry connections made him the obvious choice for the Blackwell partnership. After all, Wellington Enterprises had generated over $200 million in revenue last year, and his Harvard pedigree spoke for itself. He settled into one of the plush chairs around the mahogany conference table, spreading his materials with the confidence of a man who believed the meeting was merely a formality. The portraits of past Blackwell family members looked down from the walls, distinguished men and women who had built the company through decades of innovation and ethical leadership. Marcus barely glanced at them, too focused on his own impending triumph to notice the intelligence and dignity reflected in their painted eyes. At precisely 9 o'clock, James Morrison entered the conference room, his silver hair perfectly styled and his navy suit impeccable. He carried a thick folder and wore the expression of a man about to conduct very serious business. "Good morning, Mr. Wellington," Morrison said, his voice professionally cordial but lacking any warmth. "I trust you slept well after yesterday's dinner." Marcus beamed, interpreting the question as small talk rather than the loaded inquiry it actually was. "Wonderfully, thank you. I have to say, the Blackwell hospitality is quite something, though you might want to consider upgrading your service staff." The help seemed a bit inexperienced. Morrison's eyebrow raised almost imperceptibly. "Is that so? I'll be sure to pass along your feedback to the appropriate parties." He settled into his chair and opened the folder, revealing legal documents that would soon reshape Marcus's understanding of his situation entirely. "Now then," Morrison continued, "before we begin today's proceedings, I should mention that we're expecting several other parties to join us. The final partnership decision involves multiple stakeholders, and transparency is paramount in all Blackwell Industries dealings." Marcus nodded enthusiastically, assuming he was about to meet other executives who would rubber stamp his selection. Of course, of course. Due diligence is crucial in any major business decision." At 9:15, the door opened and David Chen, Sarah Mitchell, and Robert Kim entered, the same business leaders who had witnessed his performance the previous evening. Their faces were carefully neutral but their eyes sharp with the memory of Marcus's behavior. Marcus straightened in his chair, putting on his most charming smile. "David, Sarah, Robert," he said, rising to shake hands with forced enthusiasm. "What a pleasant surprise to see you again so soon. I didn't realize you were involved in the Blackwell partnership discussions." David Chen accepted the handshake with professional courtesy, but his grip was notably brief. "We're here in an advisory capacity, Marcus. Character references, you might say." "Character references?" Marcus laughed, the sound slightly forced. "Well, I hope you'll all put in a good word for me. Though I have to say, my track record speaks for itself." Sarah Mitchell took her seat without comment, her dark eyes studying Marcus with the intensity of a scientist examining a particularly unpleasant specimen. Robert Kim simply nodded acknowledgement, his silence somehow more ominous than any words could have been. Morrison consulted his watch and made a note in his folder. "We're waiting for one more person before we can begin. The individual who will be making the final decision about Robert Blackwell's business legacy." Marcus felt a flutter of nervousness for the first time that morning. "The final decision maker?" I was under the impression that the decision had essentially been made. My proposals have been well received." "Oh, your performance has certainly been noted," Morrison replied with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "In fact, it's been quite thoroughly documented." Before Marcus could ask what that meant, the conference room door opened again, and his breath caught in his throat. The woman who entered was strikingly beautiful, with dark skin that seemed to glow in the morning light and intelligent eyes that commanded immediate attention. She wore a perfectly tailored charcoal business suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but not from nervousness. His first thought was that this must be Robert Blackwell's widow, or perhaps a daughter from a previous marriage. Either way, he was confident that his charm and business acumen would win her over just as they had countless other female executives and investors. "Good morning, everyone," the woman said, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "I apologize for the delay. I was reviewing some final documents." Morrison stood immediately, as did the other three executives. Marcus scrambled to his feet, his mind already working on the best approach to impress this obviously influential woman. "Mr. Wellington," Morrison said, "I'd like you to meet the person who will be evaluating your partnership proposal and making the final decision about your company's potential relationship with Blackwell Industries." Marcus stepped forward with his most winning smile, extending his hand. "It's an absolute pleasure to meet you, Ms. Blackwell," she said simply, allowing him to take her hand briefly before moving to the head of the conference table. "Zara Blackwell." Marcus blinked in confusion. "Blackwell? I don't understand. Are you Robert Blackwell's daughter?" she completed, settling into the chair that had obviously been reserved for her. "Sole heir to Blackwell Industries and the person responsible for choosing our next major business partner." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, but his mind refused to process them completely. This elegant, obviously educated woman couldn't possibly be related to the maid from the previous evening. It had to be a coincidence of names, or perhaps he was misunderstanding the family relationships. "I see," he said slowly, taking his seat again but feeling somehow off balance. "Well, it's wonderful to finally meet a member of the Blackwell family. I have to say, your father built an extraordinary legacy." "Yes, he did," Zara agreed, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "He built it on principles of integrity, respect for all people regardless of their background, and the belief that true leadership means lifting others up rather than tearing them down." Something in her tone made Marcus shift uncomfortably, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly what was bothering him. "Absolutely, absolutely. Those are values I share completely. In fact, I think you'll find that Wellington Enterprises operates according to very similar principles." "Is that so?" Zara asked, opening the folder that Morrison had placed in front of her. "That's interesting, because I have some information here that suggests otherwise." Marcus's confusion deepened. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. What kind of information?" Morrison cleared his throat. "Mr. Wellington, before we proceed with any business discussions, I think it would be helpful to review your conduct during yesterday evening's dinner. Several of our evaluation team members have provided detailed accounts of your behavior." "My behavior?" Marcus looked around the table, seeing expressions ranging from disapproval to barely contained disgust. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I was perfectly professional throughout the evening." Davidson spoke up, his voice cold with controlled anger. "Professional? Is that what you call publicly humiliating a member of the service staff?" "I wasn't humiliating anyone," Marcus protested, feeling the first real stab of panic. "I was simply providing feedback about service standards. If anything, I was being helpful by pointing out areas for improvement." Sarah Mitchell leaned forward, her scientist's mind clearly organizing the evidence against him. "You called a young woman useless in front of a room full of people. You made racist comments about her background and capabilities. You deliberately spilled water just to watch her clean it up. How exactly do you define professional behavior?" Marcus felt heat rising in his cheeks, but his arrogance wouldn't allow him to back down. "Look, I may have been a bit direct in my feedback, but maintaining standards is important. I was trying to help improve the service quality for future events." "Improve service quality," Robert Kim repeated flatly. "By telling everyone at the table that there are natural hierarchies in society and that some people are born to serve?" The exact quote hit Marcus like a slap. He had said those words, but he'd been among what he thought were like-minded business associates. The fact that they were being thrown back at him in this context made him realize that the evening had been some kind of test, one he had apparently failed spectacularly. "I think there may have been some misunderstanding," he said, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "Perhaps my words were taken out of context, or misinterpreted." "Oh, I don't think there was any misunderstanding," Zara said quietly, and something in her voice made every person in the room go completely still. "Your words were quite clear, Mr. Wellington. In fact, they were so memorable that I can quote them exactly." She consulted the documents in front of her, though Marcus was beginning to suspect she didn't need to. "You said, and I quote, 'This useless girl can't even serve wine properly.' Where did you find her? The streets. You also said, 'Some people are born to lead, others to follow. Some to think, others to serve.' It's not cruel, it's just reality." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as his own words were read back to him with clinical precision. But even as panic set in, his mind was struggling to understand how this information had been so thoroughly documented. "You also suggested," Zara continued, "that the young woman in question would be better suited to cleaning offices after hours or working in a factory because it would be more appropriate to her background and capabilities." "Now wait just a minute," Marcus said, his voice rising with desperation and anger. "Even if I did say those things, they were private conversations among business associates. How could you possibly know the exact words unless—" He stopped, the horrible realization beginning to dawn on him. But it was too impossible, too absurd to believe. "Unless what, Mr. Wellington?" Morrison asked softly. Marcus looked around the table, seeing the knowledge in every face, the satisfaction of people about to witness justice being served. His gaze finally landed on Zara, really seeing her for the first time, noting the intelligence in her eyes, the strength in her posture, the unmistakable confidence of someone who had been born to power. "Unless the maid was," he whispered, unable to complete the sentence. "Unless the maid was me," Zara finished, her voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Unless the woman you spent an entire evening humiliating, insulting, and treating as less than human was actually the person whose approval you needed to achieve your business goals." The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. The impossible had become reality. The woman he had dismissed as a powerless servant was the heir to a $500 million empire. The person he had treated with casual cruelty was the one who held his professional future in her hands. That's impossible," he stammered, though even as he said it, he knew it was true. The intelligence he had dismissed, the dignity she had maintained despite his attacks, the way Morrison and Mrs. Chen had reacted to his behavior, it all made horrible, perfect sense. "Is it?" Zara asked, standing and beginning to pace around the table with the controlled energy of a predator circling wounded prey. "Is it really so impossible that a black woman could inherit and run a major corporation? Or did you simply assume that someone wearing a maid's uniform couldn't possibly be anything more than what you expected to see?" Marcus tried to speak, to offer some explanation or apology, but no words came. He was trapped in the web of his own prejudice and cruelty, and every thread of it was being pulled tight around him. "Let me tell you a little about yourself, Mr. Wellington," Zara continued, her voice taking on the tone of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "You are a man who judges people based on their appearance, their race, and their perceived social status. You believe that wealth and privilege give you the right to treat others as less than human. You think that cruelty is strength and that humiliating those you see as beneath you demonstrates your own superiority. If this revelation just gave you chills and you want to see how this incredible story of justice ends, make sure you're subscribed because we have more amazing tales of people getting exactly what they deserve. Drop a comment telling us what you would have said to Marcus in this moment. You are also," Zara went on, "exactly the kind of person my father spent his entire career fighting against. He built this company on the principle that character matters more than credentials, that true leadership means treating every person with dignity regardless of their position or background. You represent everything he opposed." Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I had no idea, if I had known who you were. If you had known who I was, you would have treated me differently," Zara finished. Which proves my point exactly. Your respect is conditional on what you think someone can do for you. That's not respect at all, it's calculation. She returned to her seat, fixing Marcus with a stare that seemed to look right through him. My father taught me that the measure of a person's character is how they treat those who can do nothing for them. By that standard, Mr. Wellington, you have failed completely. David Chen leaned forward, his voice filled with disgust. I've been in business for 30 years, Marcus, and I've never seen such a display of arrogance and prejudice. The way you treated Ms. Blackwell was absolutely appalling. I was running a test, Zara explained, her voice becoming more businesslike as she shifted into full executive mode. For the past 6 months, I've been evaluating potential partners for our next major expansion. I needed to know not just whether candidates could deliver profits, but whether they shared our values and could be trusted with my father's legacy. She gestured to the other executives around the table. David, Sarah, and Robert were also being evaluated, but their interactions with my service persona told me everything I needed to know about their character. They treated me with courtesy and respect even when they believed I was just a maid. You treated me with contempt and cruelty. Marcus looked around the table desperately, seeing his professional future crumbling before his eyes. Please, you have to understand, I never would have, if I had realized, surely we can move past this misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Sarah Mitchell's voice cut through his pleading like ice. Marcus, you revealed your true character last night. You showed us exactly who you are when you think no one important is watching. That's not a misunderstanding, that's a revelation. Robert Kim nodded grimly. The things you said about natural hierarchies and people being born to serve, those weren't momentary lapses in judgment. They were expressions of fundamental beliefs about human worth and dignity. Marcus felt tears of desperation beginning to form in his eyes. I can change. I can learn. Please, Ms. Blackwell, surely one evening's poor judgment shouldn't destroy years of business success. One evening? Zara's voice sharpened. Mr. Wellington, that one evening revealed systematic racism, casual cruelty, and a complete lack of basic human decency. These aren't flaws that can be corrected with a workshop or a sensitivity training course. They're fundamental defects of character. Morrison opened another folder and began laying out documents. Mr. Wellington, I think you should know that news of your behavior last evening has already begun to circulate in certain business circles. Several of your current partners have expressed concern about continuing their relationships with Wellington Enterprises. Marcus's face went white. What do you mean? Who have you spoken to? We haven't spoken to anyone, Morrison replied calmly. But David, Sarah, and Robert here are all influential voices in the business community. Word travels fast when someone reveals themselves to be so thoroughly unsuited for professional relationships. David Chen looked at Marcus with something approaching pity. I've already canceled the contract negotiations we had scheduled for next month, Marcus. I can't in good conscience do business with someone who treats other human beings the way you treated Ms. Blackwell. Same here, Sarah Mitchell added. My board would never approve a partnership with someone who's demonstrated such clear prejudice and lack of character. Robert Kim simply nodded his agreement, his silence somehow more damning than any words could have been. Marcus felt the room spinning around him. In the space of a few minutes, he had gone from expecting to close the biggest deal of his career to watching his professional reputation crumble in real time. This isn't fair, he said, his voice taking on a whining quality that only made him appear more pathetic. You tricked me. You deliberately misled me about who you were. This whole thing was a setup. Zara's expression hardened. I gave you the opportunity to show your true character, Mr. Wellington. The choices you made were entirely your own. I didn't force you to insult me, to make racist comments, or to treat another human being with cruelty and contempt. Those were your decisions. She stood again, moving to the window that overlooked the business district where Blackwell Industries had its headquarters. My father used to tell me that power reveals character rather than changing it. When you thought you had power over me, when you believed I was just a servant who couldn't fight back, you revealed exactly who you were underneath all the expensive suits and polite business talk. Marcus made one last desperate attempt. Please, I'll do anything. I'll make public apologies, I'll donate to charity, I'll undergo sensitivity training. Just give me a chance to make this right. Zara turned back to face him, and for a moment, Marcus thought he saw a flicker of something that might have been pity. But when she spoke, her voice was firm and final. Mr. Wellington, some things can't be made right with public relations campaigns or charitable donations. The way you treated me last night, the casual cruelty, the racist assumptions, the complete dismissal of my humanity, that came from the core of who you are. It's not something you can apologize away. She returned to her seat and began gathering the documents from her folder. The partnership you were seeking will go to David Chen's company, Pacific Imports. His proposal was excellent, but more importantly, he demonstrated the kind of character and values that align with Blackwell Industries' mission. David Chen nodded gratefully. Thank you, Ms. Blackwell. I promise you won't regret this decision. I know I won't, Zara replied with a warm smile that Marcus had never seen directed toward him. My father would have approved of this choice. Marcus sat frozen in his chair, unable to process the complete reversal of his fortunes. In less than 24 hours, he had gone from the pinnacle of professional success to utter ruin, and it was entirely his own fault. Morrison pulled out a final document. Mr. Wellington, this is a cease and desist order preventing you from using the Blackwell name in any of your business dealings or marketing materials. Any previous suggestions that you were in negotiations with us must be retracted immediately. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had spent months telling investors and clients about his upcoming Blackwell partnership. Those claims had helped him secure other deals, attract new investors, and boost his company's stock price. Now he would have to admit it had all been a lie. This will destroy me, he whispered. No, Zara corrected, her voice surprisingly gentle. Your own actions destroyed you. I simply provided the platform for you to reveal who you really are. She gathered her materials and stood to leave, but paused at the door. Mr. Wellington, I hope you'll use this experience to examine your beliefs and behaviors. Change is possible, but only if you're willing to acknowledge that the problem isn't with the world around you, it's with the man in the mirror. With that, she left the conference room, followed by Morrison and the other executives. Marcus sat alone at the mahogany table, surrounded by the portraits of the Blackwell family members who had built their empire on principles he had violated so thoroughly. Over the following weeks, news of Marcus's behavior spread throughout the business community with the speed of a wildfire. His racist and classist comments were repeated in boardrooms and country clubs, his company's stock price plummeted, and several major clients canceled their contracts. Wellington Enterprises was forced into bankruptcy within 6 months, a victim of its founder's character flaws. Marcus himself faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale told in business schools about the importance of character and the dangers of judging others based on superficial characteristics. David Chen's partnership with Blackwell Industries proved extraordinarily successful, leading to innovations that created thousands of jobs and improved countless lives. His first act as partner was to establish a scholarship fund for underprivileged students pursuing business education. For Zara Blackwell, sitting in her father's chair and looking out over the empire built on principles of dignity and respect, it was proof that his vision of ethical leadership could still triumph over the forces of prejudice and hate. The lesson was clear: character will always matter more than credentials, humanity will always be more important than hierarchy, and those who treat others with cruelty and contempt will eventually face the consequences of their choices. This incredible story of hidden identity and perfect justice shows us that our actions always have consequences, and that treating others with dignity and respect isn't just morally right, it's essential for success in life and business. If this story of karma and justice moved you, make sure you're subscribed for more amazing tales of people getting exactly what they deserve. Let us know in the comments, have you ever witnessed someone face consequences for their discrimination or prejudice? We read every comment and your stories might inspire our next video.